Probably one of the toughest subjects to get into with film is the place of religion, and not just with Kubrick. There's a lot of misinterpretations, I think, about how to approach this issue. And with Life of Pi, of course, it's a really, really hard one because the novel itself, which it's based on, is very explicit that it's trying to persuade the reader to believe in God, or at least the possibility that God is real, and that we want to believe Pi when he sort of has this embracing of God and these various religions. And Ong didn't want to do the film for a long time because he just didn't see how it was going to be possible. One is the obvious technical issue of how he's going to give us the animals and make them as lifelike as possible. And I think for the most part it succeeds. I mean, at certain points I do notice the tiger, which is obviously the main draw, and you'll see it on the poster. You will see it's a little fake. But there's also the problem, aside from just the narrative technique, because it's unreliable narration, is, well, how do you represent God or religion or religious symbols in any real way? And if you know the Hulk, there's an interesting little bit of a connection there, because at one point we see Pi looking at a comic book. So he sort of, as a naive child, sees the gods as sort of superheroes. And so he gets the ball rolling by just saying, well, these are just fantasy creatures at first. But later on in the narrative, he sort of sees real world events, and those are what allow him to translate these kind of very seemingly mundane experiences as God. There's also a lot of interesting foreshadowing at the very, very beginning. One, Pi meets a priest and how he talks to him. As far as I know, that's the only religious representative he meets. In the novel, it's a little bit different. He actually meets with three representatives. He actually meets with a Muslim, a Christian, as well as a Hindu, and he's able to sort of embrace all three the way these different men converse. He only sees a priest. So there's a little bit of a pro-Christian bias, but it's, I think, not heavily slanted. So there's really two ways he goes about this, and I don't want to ruin it for people. So I'll just say you want to pay close attention to the way the colors are mapped out through a lot of the scenes. He uses a lot of greens, and especially the way the sun is positioned. So the colors represent the various religions and the way they're both harmonizing and conflicting inside of him. There's also this externalization with the religious conflict. And here I think it's going to be a little bit all over the place. If you know Ong's other works, he's been very obsessive with parental relationships, especially the father and son relationship is something he goes back to over and over and over again. Here it's a little bit more balanced. You see a lot of with Pi with his mother, but it is heavily focused on his father. And his father's this very kind of obsessive, secular person. And so he sort of represents that kind of the argue that he shouldn't be embracing religion but reason. But when he gets out to sea, we notice that he tries to kind of meld both. He has to use a lot of scientific knowledge in order to survive. And one of the reasons he tells us that he even bothers helping the tiger, because at certain points Richard Parker is actually in danger, but he says that actually taking care of Richard Parker is what helps him, give him a reason to continue living. And so there's this weird commentary on Darwin and evolutionary processes and how, right, the future of humanity is sort of tied with the ecosystem. So there's a lot of interesting multiple messages. But I think the main problem I have with the film is that it's not a problem here, but it's going to be a problem for his later films, is that Ong is really fascinated with technology. And he's done this before with, of course, Crouching Tiger. But even with Crouching Tiger, it's a huge amount of practical effects. And he really devotes a lot of time and energy. He even apparently spoke with James Cameron. So if you see Avatar, there's actually a lot of borrowing from Avatar in terms of technology, in terms of really pushing it, in terms of giving us this kind of religious visions and all these kind of mystical experiences. And I think it probably would have benefited to do a little bit more light work on this and not be so heavy-handed in terms of the CGI, but it does work for the most part. The only ones I really had a problem with was sort of the tidal wave scenes, and sort of when we see the boats being rocked back and forth with waves. It's sort of just, obviously, this all has to be manipulated through computers. It's just too dangerous to have the child actor try to go through this, obviously, physically. So it's sort of a mixed reaction. I think overall, this is a really, really good film, and probably one of the top tier of his own films. But I think overall, it kind of signals a bad pattern that we're going to see with Billy Lynn, which I thought was really good in places, but I do think was hampered by this obsessive focus with technology And I haven't seen Gemini Man, but I'm going to be very disappointed with what Ong does with the technology in that film as well. So a pretty good film unto itself, but Life of Pi, I think, sets up a kind of weird bad pattern that he's going to continue on. And the Kubrick connection, I think, is pretty obvious in the terms of Barry Lyndon, where Kubrick experimented with new lenses and really tried to use natural light with these super powerful cameras on set, and with The Shining when he had the Steadicam and experimenting in that way. So there's a lot of interesting little parallels between how he's trying to sort of work within the Kubrick tradition. All right, this has been Kubrick Analyzed on the Ong Lee connection between technology and God. If you like the content, please hit the like button and/or subscribe. Thank you for listening. Please be safe.